Hey friends of Powerhouse Bakery, my name is Suzanne Parker and I'm the owner here at this little bakery, and today we're going to talk about 30 days of healthy. We've been doing this kind of discussion for the last couple of visits, and we've been really talking too about how to build our immune system. And so important when we try to fight off the external environment with the strength of our internal environment. And no better way to do that than looking at this beautiful array of colors. Today I want to show you how to make kimchi, and I want to talk a little bit about the value of looking at fermentation. So when we think of fermented foods, we want to know not only how to do it, we want to know what to use as those important ingredients. We want to know why. Why is it valuable to look at fermented foods in relation to our health and our immunity? So today I want to try to cover that for us. So let me first start with what I have on my table, because no matter what, when you start with these beautiful colors, you can't help but get something really healthy. And what I've got here is my little blend of my very own kimchi. So what I've got in here is a nice variety of colors. I've got textures. Of course, I've got our important immune-fighting phytochemicals, immune-building, I should say. So let me just pull a little bundle out of here, and you can see. I've got some cabbage, I've got carrots, I've got a little bit edamame, I've got some beautiful purple kale, and if I dig a little deeper, I might be able to show you some of the beautiful spices. So you can see in here I've got a little bit of turmeric, I've got some garlic, rice vinegar, a tiny bit of salt. So what makes this so special is not only are they loaded with those beautiful phytochemicals that we can really tell by all the colors, also what happens with the food when we put it into a certain recipe, it helps the natural sugars in these vegetables change. So when we allow these vegetables to be exposed to the environment, they start to break down. We have some naturally occurring bacteria that is in our air, and so really that's how our body learns how to build an immune system. Based on what we are exposed to in the environment, our immune system starts to get stronger in order to fight off the bad bacteria or viruses that are floating around. And so with a fermented food product, what we try to do is boost what is currently in the environment, and that will help these foods to now be a nice way to be preserved. And then of course we can take in these beautiful vegetables throughout the week, and they are preserved, but they also are adding an extra layer of fermentation. So let's keep going in this topic. So fermented foods are absolutely a way of preserving the healthfulness of these phytochemicals, and they're adding an extra bonus, which is going to be the change of the sugars in those vegetables into what we call a sugar alcohol, or we could even say a type of yeast is being developed from those sugars. So whenever we have a ferment process, we know that the sugars that are naturally occurring are going to change, and they could turn into an acid or even an alcohol. So I know this is getting a little bit of science, but it's really fun when you think about how our body uses the healthful ingredients and even the processing that sometimes happens in preservation, and it again helps our healthy gut bacteria grow and develop a good population in our gut. So when we have fermenting sugars, they're going to change into some acids and alcohols. Temperature is really important. So I'm going to show you how to set up the cabbage so that it starts the fermenting process. And then we start adding other ingredients there that will also have different layers and concentrations of sugars, and not to mention flavors. And then you start getting a really fabulous flavor of maybe a strong sour, sometimes slightly bitter, and even elements of sweet in this fermented process. And did you know that the fermenting long ago, before we even had refrigeration, was actually a way to preserve vegetables? So long ago, when we didn't have HEB handy, we would have a big bountiful garden, and so many products would be ready at the same time. How do we preserve them? So in some cases we would do a canning process But in this situation, we're going to do fermenting. And so it allows the good bacteria to grow from the environment. It settles in onto those vegetables and it starts to grow some of these healthy bacteria. When we ingest that, now we're starting to get a secondary benefit. So it's preserving the foods. The second benefit is now it starts to provide some of these healthy yeast bacteria, or of course the other healthy bacteria, we'll just kind of put into a general category. They can go into our gut and it increases the healthy gut flora. So we've probably heard a lot about healthy gut. We've probably heard a lot about leaky gut. Leaky gut is when the lining of the intestine is not healthy. It's not healthy for a myriad of things, but let's just say, very simply, it's not digesting and absorbing the foods properly, aka it's leaking. So the contents of the gut that we want to go into our bloodstream are leaking into the interstitial fluid and just basically not going to the right place. And so we know that we want healthy flora. That will then help the gut lining to stay healthy and strong and improve good digestion. What are some of the symptoms if we have leaky gut or we have GI problems because the flora is not vibrant and in good balance? You probably know where I'm going with this. People will have a general malaise, irritable bowel syndrome, you've probably heard me talk about before, and it really is a variety of symptoms, but let's face it, it's gas, bloating, constipation, or even diarrhea. Just an overall feeling of feeling sick and like you're not healthy. So irritable bowel is a big umbrella of symptoms, and we know that if we add fermented foods that helps to stabilize or maybe even improve the gut bacteria, IBS symptoms go away, and that's what we love. We want to figure out a way to keep the gut bacteria really in balance, the good bacteria high in numbers. That helps to keep the bad bacteria in low numbers. Very similar to when we use the fermentation process to preserve foods. So we preserve foods by making sure that bad bacteria is not growing. And so that's the process that we do when we're making this kimchi. So let's get started. Here I've got some cabbage, some green cabbage that I'm going to add to my bowl. And actually, I'm just going to go ahead and put all of them in here. We're going to add salt and water, and it's just going to sit there in a bath for about 10 minutes. With kimchi, the fermentation time is really not as long. It's about 3 hours on the counter, and so it's really not as critical as some of the dairy products that I will show you too. If you've ever had dairy products that are fermented, you know of yogurt. You might also know of kefir. There's also some really cool products that are used in the Middle East and other cultures that are cultured by the active bacteria in the air, and it makes this wonderful dish. If you've ever had creme fraiche, in my background in the French world, creme fraiche was heavy cream that you left on the counter open for at least 24 hours, and it ferments, changes from the air, so the bacteria that's present. So let's get going here. I'm going to add my 2 teaspoons of salt. Now when you're doing any kind of fermented product, it's very important to use all very healthy ingredients, because of course your kimchi is going to only be as healthy as the ingredients you start with. So the salt that I'm using should have no additives, so it should be kosher, sea salt. It should not have any potassium and no iodine. So that's what I'm using here. So then I'm going to add some water. So I added my little bit of salt and a little bit of water. So now I'm going to let this just sit on the counter. Now again, if I were fermenting something that had a lot more sugars in it, it would be more critical to make sure that the temperature is between 70 and 75 degrees as I'm letting it sit on the counter. Now, because I want to let this sit out for a while, I do want to cover it. We want there to be good aeration, so we don't want to use plastic wrap, but we do want to use a nice clean cloth. I've just dampened it slightly, and we're just going to let this sit on the counter for about 3 hours. Now, when we come back, we can add more goodies to it. So again, I've just got different colors in this. In the recipe that I'm going to give you, I've also included beets as an option. So just know that there's some good variation to the colors that we can add. Then we're going to add some other colors. So here's some carrots. I love carrots because there is a good amount of natural sugars. So here's that great base that's going to add the fermentation process. Because carrots have sugar and we want the sugar to gradually turn into the sugar alcohol and the acids. And again, that gives it a fabulous flavor. So I can let this sit on the counter a little longer, but what I'm going to do is to cover it while I get us some more veggies. I've started the chopping process, but I want you to see how we make them really pretty. So if we're going to use some green onions, in fact I'm going to use these. Notice that they're beautiful, fresh, there's no blemishes, there are really no dried edges. That's what we want. Again, go ahead and spend a little extra money on organics for this particular process because we want the veggies to be really beautiful. And we don't want the sugars to be extracted too quickly. If there's bruising, the oxidation process happens a lot faster and we could get a spoilage rather than the nice fermenting flavors. So I'm going to cut these green onions on the angle so they're pretty. Notice that in my jar here, I love having lots of different textures, and of course the cuttings will make a big difference in how pretty they look. And I could go ahead and cut my asparagus if I wanted to, but in this one I went ahead and left them whole just so it adds a little bit of variation in the size as well. I just think that looks so pretty. So here are my beautiful green onions. I'm not going to use all of the end because I actually really like the bright green. It's got a little more color, texture, and flavor. So that's going to be my beautiful green onions that I'm going to add to my bowl. I'm going to add it to this bowl as I'm letting my cabbage, carrots, and kale do its fermenting there in that sodium solution. So I'm going to add in my green onions. And next I'm going to add in some ginger and turmeric. So notice I've just started with the fresh root. It's really better to use the fresh root rather than doing a pulp out of a jar. You just want all the freshness that you can. Now to get the most out of your ginger, very carefully peel the outside skin. And honestly, you could even keep the skin because it has a fine flavor, but I think it just looks prettier. Now we are going to get some oxidation as we cut, but that's okay because we're going to pretty quickly put it into our solution. So I'm going to cut off the end, and now I'm going to get nice thin slices of that section that I peeled, and I'm just going to do a rough chop and add this into my mixture. So I've got green onions, kale, and I've got a little bit of that cabbage. You could use red cabbage too. It's a beautiful variation. So pretty rough chop. Again, I want to get a nice little bite of that when I'm getting my kimchi out, and you can serve it with other grains. Of course, you can serve it with meat or fish, but sometimes just with eggs or a salad makes it a really nice variation. So now I'm going to get my garlic cloves, and again, to get the paper to come off easily, just go ahead and press it with the back of your knife. I'll show you that again. Once I take the clove out of the big head of garlic, I'm just going to press down, and when you hear that little crunch, you know you've got a fresh, beautiful clove of garlic. The paper comes off very easily, and now I'm ready to just do a rough chop. I wouldn't recommend using a garlic press, only because you lose so much of the wonderful pulp of the garlic that's left in the press. So in this way, you're just doing a rough chop and you're getting all that wonderful garlic right into your dish. I'm going to add that in next. And now for the turmeric. So notice here in my turmeric that I did for my first batch, I've been letting it sit in a little bit of orange juice. I love the bright color of turmeric, and I really want to keep it using that color, and I don't want it to bleed too much into the rest of the dish. I want it to have a little bit more of a distinct flavor and, of course, colors. So that's why I went ahead and let it sit a little bit in the sweet citrus of orange juice. Okay, and again, I'm just going to take off the outer peel of that turmeric. Oh, it smells so good. Turmeric is a wonderful raw way to get lots of antioxidant power. A little more slices here. So again, you can do about a tablespoon. You can do less if you want. Notice that it's definitely going to get your hands orange. That's okay. It will wash off eventually. You'll have a little stain for a few hours, but that's okay. It sure does look like a carrot, doesn't it? But I tell you, it's a great way to eat it. Now, the turmeric or the capsicum is definitely a great way to get all those antioxidants. And the curcumin, which is the scientific name of the turmeric, is one that I've talked about a lot as a really powerhouse of antioxidant power. So we really want to use that one. And for the capsicum, we are going to add some of the sriracha chili sauce. So that's going to go into my mixture with the liquids. So I'm going to add about a teaspoon. And again, you don't have to make it so hot. If you want to take this out altogether, you can. Then I'm going to add my rice vinegar, so a few tablespoons. And then I'm going to add water in order to cover my veggies. And then a little touch of fish sauce. So there's lots of recipes for kimchi, but because it's Korean based, fish sauce is really a unique flavor, and it feels like it really just has to have it to taste authentic. So now I'm going to stir this around. So this is where all my spices are, the ginger, the turmeric, the garlic, and of course my onions. And then I'm going to pour this over my cabbage. And then I just need to add a little bit of liquid so that it stays immersed the whole time. That's pretty important in a fermented product. Like kimchi, you want to make sure it stays in solution so that the veggies don't dry out and you get the good mix of those flavors as well as the fermentation process needs to happen. All right, let's fold it in. Look at how pretty these colors are. All right. So you could certainly add shredded beet, which again is in the recipe that I'm sharing with you, or you could use any bright colored vegetable. As much as you can, get some variation in size and texture. And look, I've got plenty of liquid in there. My recipe does call for a little bit of sugar. Now in this particular recipe that I'm doing today, I just used a little orange juice. But the sugar does help to speed up the process of the fermentation. So your choice. If your kitchen is a lot warmer than 75 degrees, you probably are going to need to be careful because the fermentation might go a little faster. To know if it's fermented enough, it should just have a wonderful aroma. A little bit sour, have a little bit of an alcohol nuance to it, but it will be a great salad. And don't forget, the leaves of the vegetables are going to start to soften a little bit, and we know that's a sign that the sugars are starting to break down. Now with my asparagus, I use some frozen asparagus, so they're already soft. And that's just going to help because asparagus has an extra amount of starch in it, so it's going to help increase that fermentation process. So I'm going to just, in this one, I'm going to go ahead and cut them on a diagonal, make them look pretty. Another high starch vegetable that you could use is artichoke. In California, where I grew up, artichokes were something that we ate all the time. It's a little less common here in Texas, but you can get frozen artichokes, and it's a really nice addition to any kimchi because it's kind of unusual. The typical kimchi will be made with cabbage, and so of course we can use that as the mainstay, but then really just remember that any vegetable is just fabulous. So now I've got all my veggies in there. I want to make sure they're well nestled in. And now I'm going to start adding a little more liquid. I'm going to show you how we want to make sure that it stays well protected in the liquid solution. I'm going to go ahead and add in the rest of my ginger and garlic. And here's the rest of my turmeric and a little bit of the orange juice. So this is going to stay really nicely in the fridge for up to 2 weeks, probably even longer. But the main thing is once we get it fermented, we want to watch it. If it starts to get bubbly or if it has an off smell, then we can probably let it go. Oftentimes with vegetables, it's pretty clear when they've gone past the good stage because mold will actually grow. If it's got just the perfect ratio of the sodium solution, then the chances of that happening are very low. So again, make sure you follow a recipe very carefully so that you have just the right ratio of the liquid as well as all of your wonderful flavors. Now I'm just going to add a little bit more water so I can make sure we got enough to cover it. And now I'm just going to press it in. So see how it's starting to come up around the sides? That's just perfect. There we go. So I'm going to add my cloth on the top. And again, it's going to sit on the counter for about 3 hours. I could definitely check the temperature and make sure that I'm in the 70 to 75 degree range, and it should be right on track. So in summary, what I want us to do is in this 30 days of healthy, I want you to experiment with lots of different ways to add in some antioxidant power. When we think of fruits and vegetables, it's always easy. We know that bright colors are an easy win. But what if we don't have time to always make a salad? The fermenting process is an easy way to store vegetables and let them last longer in the fridge. If you've ever had a salad from Powerhouse Bakery, we do a quinoa kale salad, we do a boshnee salad, even a sorghum salad. All of these are grains or vegetables that have been sitting in a sauce. So even if you don't want to make a fancy kimchi, doing a light ginger lime dressing that has some citrus as well as a little bit of sweet will help to preserve the vegetables. So don't be afraid to pre-dress a grain as well as a vegetable. Put it in the fridge and let it really create some of its healthy bacteria. Remember that when we have a healthy biome, it's going to absolutely help our body do better in digestion. And the most important thing is, remember that our body makes our healthy immune system. And so much of that immune system comes from our gut. So starting there with a healthy gut biome and putting in lots of fruits, but lots of vegetables is a great way to go. So I hope this has helped you, and I hope that you can make a beautiful kimchi sometime soon. And don't forget to add it to each meal of the day. It's perfect with eggs, it's perfect with a little lentil patty for breakfast, or add it to a quinoa kale salad at lunch, or even a salmon fillet at dinner. So I hope this has helped you, and we'll see you again soon.